baby to bring her back. Trade Union Federation COSATU says the budget speech was provocative and a declaration of war. The Public Servants Association says they will fight government on plans to cut the public sector wage bill. Ratings agency Fitch says the decision to cut the wage bill and not increase taxes will not help the country's debt trajectory. However, not everyone is unhappy about the budget speech. Clothing and Textile Workers Union SACTU is welcoming planned procurement reforms, and it also says, though it was hoping for more money to be allocated to the industry in terms of creating jobs. Well, joining us to discuss this further is SACTU Simon Eppel, live from our Cape Town studio. Simon, very good morning to you. First up, your overriding reaction to the budget speech.
Well, look, we share the sentiments of our federation, COSATU. It was provocative. It was disingenuous of the finance minister to go around like Mad Max dropping bombs. A fight isn't necessary. A fight is not predictable. It's not a fait accompli. But fights are constructed through provocation. Fights are constructed through attempts to destabilize trust relationships. And really that's what we think the budget speech achieved yesterday. Launching several rocket launches at the unions, both in the sort of the day beforehand and at the budget, and trying to essentially make workers pay the bill for industrial scale looting, corruption, maladministration, executive perks which are outrageous. So there's too much fat in the system, and yet workers are made to pay the price. We view it as a neoliberal budget, a neoliberal attack on workers, but not just the public sector workers, also the private sector workers. An injury to one is an injury to all, and certainly within COSATU and its affiliates, if government doesn't begin to calm its heads, find a way forward and begin to withdraw the rockets, well, then we're going to see the economy coming to a halt through mass action, not just in the public service but beyond.
Well, there are aspects of this budget speech that I've seen SACTU welcoming, like the procurement reforms. Am I correct?
Yes, exactly. So the overall tone, you know, obviously we're upset with the overall tone, but there are elements within the budget that we must welcome. I mean, it would be nonsensical to say that there is nothing good that we can see, and there are several aspects. So take the procurement legislation, for example. Goodness, we've been waiting a while for that. You know, I mean, someone has been fast asleep at the wheel, whoever has been putting together that bill, but now it's ready for public comment. It will, we hope, give us the opportunity to begin to have greater control over the procurement regime, which is, you know, the public knows this well. It's a fact that people talk about on the streets. Public procurement is a mess. So there needs to be greater control. Our particular interest in that is to the extent that public procurement serves the purposes of creating jobs in the country through the local content policies. So that's where the state designates certain products that they must be locally made and procured from local manufacturers. And we've seen that as a policy in the state. But because there are so many procuring authorities, there are so many chiefdoms or chiefs in their own chiefdoms, there are so many cooks with their own kitchens in the economy and across the breadth of the state, we see policies like that being implemented unevenly and sometimes quite badly. So the bill gives us an opportunity to bring greater discipline to the procurement regime. That's what we want. We want to see jobs being created in factories because the state has a much better, much more controlled, much more reliable way of buying and sending its orders into the factories and creating jobs.
Experience in the recent years has shown, Mr. Eppel, that procurement of public goods or procurement in the public space has been prone to be abused from a corruption perspective and used to enrich a few people. That's one aspect of this. But the other one I just want to put to you is that are you hoping as a trade union that this new legislation will also assist in how illegal imports of fake goods or cheap goods come into our shores, particularly in the clothing and textile industry?
Yes, so the answer is a little complicated, but essentially yes. What you have at the moment is, according to the procurement legislation, roughly around, at a conservative estimate, about 800 different procurement authorities in the state who are empowered to do their own procurement. Each has many supply chain officials. They conduct thousands, tens of thousands of transactions, and so you get both deliberate non-compliance with the rules, and sometimes you just get, silly mistakes creeping in. There is a need to discipline that system to make sure that there's uniformity in the way that procurement is done. Let's take clothing and textiles, for example, that the buying of clothing and textiles is done in such a way that locally made products are bought by the state across the breadth of the state, and that each of those roughly 800 procurement institutions is doing that job properly. To the extent that that relates to imports, that would then mean that instead of imported products from China going into, let's say, for example, EPWP uniforms, you could start to have small businesses across the country soak up those orders, produce for the state, and you create jobs on that basis. So there is a relationship to imports. But really the procurement bill is just going to try to achieve something that's already there in intention, but doesn't happen because procurement is like a very, very leaky sieve.
Yeah, and procuring for school uniforms, I guess you'd support that it should be done locally at all times at an affordable price for South Africans.
Absolutely. It's a no-brainer for us. We have a huge demand for uniforms in the country amongst our youth, our students, our learners. We see the need for those products to be made in South Africa. In some instances, they are. There are some large retailers who produce who sell those goods and buy them from local factories, but there are also products which are imported. Certainly we want those to be made in South Africa. We want the goods of the state to be made in South Africa. We want the goods in the corporates, big business, to be made in South Africa. We want the goods from, all across the spectrum, from all the social partners that exist, business, government, community organizations, churches. We want those to be made in South Africa. This bill announced in the budget speech, or referred to in the budget speech, is only one tool in a much broader campaign to try to localize procurement of clothing and textiles, but it's an important one because the state buys a lot of clothing and textiles. In the hospitals there are blankets, there are towels, in the sand parks, game reserves, there's bed linen. On the blue train there are products. All across the state, wherever you go, whether the buildings and their blinds and their carpets, or in the bathrooms with the hand towels, or on the bodies of the state workers, there is clothing and textiles everywhere, and we want those to be made in South Africa, and they should be by law.
Now, Mr. Eppel, finally, in the statement I saw from SACTU, among other things that you were sort of pleased about in the budget speech is the money allocated for what is known as the reimagined industrialization kind of strategy. But you felt that Mr. Tito Mboweni could have put more money into that particular industrial effort.
Exactly. So what we've seen over the last few years developing is a really smart approach to national economic development. It's the compacting process that the President referred to in the State of the Nation. It's a process that started to unfold, for example, in the master plans, where different bodies representing different industries come together and look at what they can do to reimagine and recommit to the growth of certain industries. We don't think the budget allocated by the Finance Minister is enough. We think there needs to be a lot more money that goes into supporting economic growth, at least around industrialization and incentives. But certainly the concept around compacting, getting the social partners together, asking them what they can commit, that's fundamental for us. And ironically, that's been missing in the approach taken to the public service workers and the wage bill. That's a unilateral action. It's not a compacting process to find solutions to a problem which may or may not exist. It doesn't allow for that debate to happen. That's a unilateral approach. In the reimagined industrial policy, we're seeing a very different, very smart, very clever, very collective effort to build consensus about options, but we needed, as I say, the Finance Minister to allocate more money for those efforts, because that's where jobs are created, in the factories, around the country, organized around high volumes of demand for certain products which are collectively defined by industries. That's where our reindustrialization will take place.
Thank you very much, Simon Eppel, speaking on behalf of SACTU in response to the budget speech. Well, government, of course, wants now to trim the public service wage bill by 160 billion rand. It also wants to renege on a salary agreement for the next financial year. The Minister, Tito Mboweni, making that announcement yesterday.